The crisp white invitation, with its embossed edges, rested on my steel desk like a silent challenge. It bore my full name, Lieutenant General Scarlett Vance, a title this family seemed to have forgotten, or perhaps deliberately ignored for years. I was no longer merely Scarlett to them, I was a name etched in duty, forged in fire, a designation that carried the weight of continents and commands. The unbroken seal hinted at a truth I already knew. Whispers had reached me, forwarded emails, a casual remark from a former classmate. Yet, it wasn't truly real until that moment my sister Caroline was to be wed. And not just wed, but marrying Major Michael Harrison, a man whose life I had, 6 years prior, pulled from the very jaws of oblivion. The irony was a blade, sharp and precise, twisting in an old, unhealed wound. For 6 years my mother's voice had been a distant echo, never crossing the state lines that separated us. No birthday greetings, no words of comfort when my second deployment nearly stole my hearing, only silence. And now, this elegant, subtle strike to the core, signed not with affection or warmth, but with a single, familiar word, penned in her meticulous script: behave. That afternoon, the base in Stuttgart held an unusual stillness. Outside my quarters, the wind wrestled with the flagpole, its defiant creak a counterpoint to the disciplined sterility within a stark steel bed, uniforms pressed to perfection. A locked trunk guarding secrets no one would ever touch. I turned the invitation over and over, as if its very shape might alter under my gaze. Then came the sharp double rap at my door. Sergeant Miller entered without waiting. "General?" he acknowledged, his eyes briefly flicking to the envelope. Of course, he knew. Miller possessed an uncanny radar for information and the patience of ancient stone. He took a seat without preamble. Our conversations rarely veered into personal territory, yet he had known me since I was a green captain, brimming with raw determination and a scarcity of trust. "You going?" he asked, his voice even. I didn't respond, instead sliding the invitation across the table. He picked it up, squinting at the gilded lettering, exhaling slowly. "Harrison?" he murmured, almost to himself. "That's the young man you pulled from that crater in Helmand, isn't it?" "The very same," I affirmed, my voice clipped, steady. Sergeant Miller leaned back. "You saved his life, and now he's marrying your sister." The silence that settled between us was not awkward. It was a familiar companion, holding more unspoken meaning than any words could convey. Miller did not pry. He simply waited. "Do you think I should go?" I asked, finally breaking the stillness. He studied me for a beat, his gaze penetrating. "That depends, General. Are you going to fight a war or bury a ghost?" A laugh escaped me, not one of mirth, but of grim recognition. "Perhaps just watch one burn." He offered no smile. "Then go. But do not wear your stars as armor, Scarlett. Wear them as memory. Let them remember who you became without them." His words resonated long after he departed. I returned the invitation to my desk, then walked to the narrow window overlooking the training field. Below, a new class of recruits ran drills, eager, boisterous, blissfully unaware. For a fleeting moment, I envied them. A sudden gust of wind rattled the pane. Somewhere outside, a drill sergeant barked a command, and a raw shout answered, "Sir, yes, sir." With the kind of unyielding fire I had long since extinguished within myself, I moved to my closet, retrieved my dress uniform, the one I hadn't worn since the funeral, the one where my voice had been denied. I laid it flat on the bed, smoothing the sleeves as if tending to old wounds. That day returned with a sharpness I hadn't anticipated. My father had been laid to rest with full honors, Marine Corps band a 21-gun salute. Yet, no seat had been saved for me in the front row. My mother, Martha, sat between Caroline and Uncle Robert, her lips pressed into that familiar, bitter line. When I approached, she didn't even look up. Caroline had merely glanced at me, her eyes unreadable, before turning back to the ceremony as if I were nothing more than a misplaced uniform. I stood throughout the entire service. Afterward, Martha Vance had placed a single, cool hand on my forearm, her voice a low murmur. "You shouldn't have come in uniform. It makes it look like you're trying to upstage the family." The family. I recalled saying nothing, simply walking away, and I had not looked back since. Now, 6 years and 2 continents later, I held a wedding invitation, a whisper of reconciliation disguised as obligation, Michael Harrison. It wasn't merely the marriage that stung, it was that he, of all people, was binding himself to the woman who had once, on record, declared me a disgrace to the Vance name. I remembered that night in Helmand, the deafening explosion, the swirling dust, the twisted steel. Michael's leg nearly severed. I had crawled across open ground to reach him, blood in my mouth, shrapnel embedded in my shoulder. The scar was still there. He had whispered, "I owe you," before they airlifted him out. And now he was marrying Caroline. I opened my laptop, flight schedules, Richmond, Virginia. 1 stop in Frankfurt. I chose the Redeye, quiet, anonymous. I didn't inform base command. I didn't even tell my driver. 30 seconds later, the ticket confirmation landed in my inbox. I wasn't going to be welcomed. I was going to be seen. For the first time in years. 3 years ago, I had pulled Michael Harrison from a live minefield. In 2 weeks, he would marry the woman who had sought to destroy me. The irony, a bitter tang, dripped through my memories. I could still hear it, the brittle crackle of static in my comms, the sharp intake of breath before a whispered, "Shit, that's a mine." Then the shrill bark of my own voice, sharper than I remembered. "Don't move!" Michael froze, dust clinging to his skin. The metal plate he'd stepped on lay half exposed beneath the dirt. He didn't dare breathe, neither did I. We stared at each other across 10 feet of open hell. In that stretch of agonizing silence, an unspoken understanding passed between us. He knew he was dead, and I knew I would not let that happen. I didn't remember the pain, only the relentless crawl, elbows grinding into gravel, every breath tasting of ash. I disarmed it with fingers I couldn't stop from trembling. When it clicked out of armed mode, Michael wept quietly. I never mentioned it in the report. Now, I sat in 3C of a Lufthansa flight from Stuttgart to Dallas, gazing out at a sky too soft for the story held within my mind. The seat beside me was empty. I'd paid extra to ensure it. The flight attendant had smiled, seeing the ribbons on my blouse. She offered champagne. I asked for water. Somewhere over the Atlantic, I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to block out the crushing weight of what lay ahead. Not war, not combat, but something far more intricate, more familiar. Family. The plane touched down 20 minutes early. Dull as international smelled of overused hand sanitizer and fresh wax. I moved through customs with practiced ease, my military ID a swift pass. I had barely stepped into the arrivals hall when my phone vibrated. Unknown number. I almost let it ring, out of sheer spite. Then curiosity prevailed. "Hello?" My voice even, unreadable. Well, you actually came. It was Caroline." Her voice remained unchanged. That lilting sweetness barely concealing a core of steel. She could twist a compliment into an accusation. "I didn't say I was coming to celebrate," I replied, already heading toward the escalator. "You didn't say anything for 6 years," she chirped, too brightly. "So, this is progress?" There was no apology in her tone, not even a flicker of hesitation. "I came because I was invited," I stated. "Right. Because Mom guilted you into it." I didn't answer. A pause. Then, she chirped again. "Well, Michael's looking forward to seeing you. You two always had chemistry." I stopped mid-stride on the moving walkway. "That's not funny." "I didn't mean it to be," she insisted. But I could hear the smile in her voice. The same one she used at school dances when telling teachers I was going through a phase. That same curated innocence that hit her sharp as claws. "Is that all?" I asked. "I just wanted to make sure you weren't showing up in full uniform. It's not festive." I ended the call without replying. Outside, Virginia was bursting with the early promise of spring. The drive to Alexandria wound through neighborhoods adorned with dogwoods and cherry blossoms. The streets were pristine, the sidewalks freshly swept. It resembled a postcard sent to affirm a perfect life. I bypassed the freeway, allowing the car to weave through the side streets I used to cycle down, back when I was still just Scarlet. when scraped knees and bruised pride were the gravest injuries I knew. As I pulled into my mother's coal-sack, I spotted Mrs. Albright, the neighbor with the perpetually pruned hydrangeas and eyes that saw too much. She was watering her garden, a hose coiled like a question mark at her feet. She squinted toward my car, tilting her head. "Scarlett," she called out. I stepped out, adjusting my duffel on my shoulder. "Hi, Mrs. Albright," she blinked. "Well, my goodness, you're still in the military?" I offered a smile that didn't reach my teeth. "Yes, Mom." She nodded slowly, her eyes trailing over my rank insignia. My stance, my silence. "I thought you might have, well, left after everything." "Some of us stay," I said, walking past her hedges without waiting for a reply. The Vance house stood exactly as I remembered, too perfect, too polished, too falsely quiet. The shutters were freshly painted, the driveway immaculate, no sign of age or decay. Only the porch light flickered slightly, as if even the electricity held its breath. I rang the bell, a pause, then footsteps. The scent struck me, first lemon polish, my mother's signature. Every surface in that house had been scrubbed until it gleamed with disapproval. Martha stood there, dressed in beige slacks and a pearl-colored blouse. Her hair was pulled back tightly, not a strand out of place. Her eyes swept over my uniform. The silence between us thickened. "Please don't ruin this for Caroline." They used to call my silence disrespectful. Now they called it convenient. The dining room remained unchanged. Not the chandelier, not the china, not the palpable tension humming beneath the polished mahogany table. 15 seats, 14 bodies, one battlefield disguised as a family gathering. I paused just inside the archway, observing them. Martha flitted between wine glasses and napkin folds as if preparing for royalty. Her earrings caught the light. Tiny gold anchors, a subtle nod to my father's service. Caroline sat, already pristine in a silk blouse, laughing too loudly at something our cousin Ethan had just said. He wasn't particularly witty, but charming enough that no one noticed, except me. I noticed everything. My seat awaited at the far end, not beside Caroline, not even in the middle where I might be visible in the family photos sure to be taken later. No, mine was next to the sideboard, where the heat from the kitchen brushed the back of my neck and the conversation rarely reached. I pulled out the chair. It creaked. Caroline raised her glass. "To family," she announced. "To new beginnings," Martha added, flashing a glance that might have been aimed at me, or perhaps through me. "To Major Harrison and the bride-to-be," chimed in Aunt Carol. No mention of me, no introduction. "No, Scarlett's back." "No, Lieutenant General Scarlett Vance is here from Germany." Just a blank space where acknowledgement should have lived. I took a sip of water. The wine hadn't reached me yet. Perhaps it never would. The former colonel seated near Martha, Colonel Jenkins, furrowed his brow when our eyes met. "You look familiar," he mused, half to himself. Martha quickly leaned in. "Oh, Rebecca, she's been stationed overseas, doing security work." The words landed like a disguised slap, a deliberate dismissal. "Security detail," Caroline clarified with a saccharine smile. "She guards doors. Important ones, I'm sure." A few polite chuckles rippled across the table. They didn't reach me. I let my eyes rest on the silverware, a salad fork, a dessert spoon, a knife too dull to draw blood, but sharp enough for pretense. My silence was not submission, it never had been. But in this house with this family, silence had always been perceived as a threat. Jenkins tilted his head again, his eyes narrowing. "Wait a minute. Afghanistan. Fubi Salama." I didn't blink. "Yes, sir." His mouth opened as if to say more, then closed again. He looked at Martha, who gave the tiniest shake of her head. He turned back to his plate. I let the silence grow, punctuated by spoon clinks and throat clearing. No one asked me a question. No one paused to include me. I could have been a well-dressed ghost. But even a ghost leaves a chill. The server finally reached my side of the table with the wine. I took the glass without a word. Caroline turned toward me, her eyes glinting with the pleasure of performance. "So, how long are you here for, Becky? Or are you on call to guard a missile silo or something?" A smirk rippled down the table. I took a sip, let it settle, then set the glass down slowly. "The people I guard," I said, my voice calm but deliberate, "portraying this entire room." A profound silence bloomed, not loud, not angry, just still. Even the chandelier seemed to hold its breath. No one laughed. For the first time, they didn't know where to place me. And that, I realized, terrified them. My name wasn't on the seating chart. Neither was my title. It was printed on thick, pearlized cardstock, laid out on a brass easel just inside the church foyer. Table by table, name by name. As my eyes scanned downward, past cousins, plus ones, former neighbors, I found nothing. No Scarlett, no Lieutenant General Vance. Just a blank space, printed in a delicate floral font. I stood there longer than I intended, watching other guests file past, murmuring pleasantries, adjusting corsages, brushing invisible lint from lapels. A woman in lavender heels reached around me and tapped the board. "Oh, table 8, she squealed to her partner. "That's close." I looked again. Table 12, bottom corner, near the fire exit, the emergency exit, of course. Martha had mentioned it casually that morning. An afterthought as she handed me a plate of fruit I hadn't asked for. "You'll be at table 12, out of view for everyone's sake." She hadn't even waited for my response. Now here I stood in dress blues, ribbons perfectly aligned, hair pinned with military precision. A statue in the church entryway, trying not to calculate how deliberately I had been placed on the margins. The church itself was beautiful, I would concede that. White lilies framed the altar. Soft violin strings drifted from the speakers. A woman in a headset adjusted pew ribbons with surgical precision. The stained glass glowed in soft gold and blues. Everything was curated, controlled. I was not part of the curation. Martha approached from the side, a swish of pale beige and practiced warmth. "You clean up well," she said, her eyes scanning my medals as if they might somehow tarnish the air. "Just remember, no press. If anyone asks what you do, just say you're in logistics." I stared at her. "I command brigades." She tilted her head slightly. "And you're here as a guest." Before I could answer, a photographer brushed past, camera clicking. He paused, looked me up and down, then turned to capture a group shot of Caroline laughing with 3 bridesmaids. The lens didn't swing back. A voice behind me whispered, "Cold in here, huh?" It was one of the ushers, chuckling as he adjusted his cufflinks. "Or maybe it's just the bride's mother," I replied, saying nothing more. The ceremony was brief, efficient. Caroline wore white, as if her purity had never been questioned. Michael stood beside her, polished, proper, unreadable. He scanned the pews once, his gaze pausing when it brushed mine. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked, then looked away. No one mentioned the woman who had dragged his bleeding body out of a minefield. Apparently, that wasn't part of the fairy tale. When the priest asked for close family to come forward for the blessing, I stood out of habit. A reflex more than a desire. But Martha's hand was there before I could move, light and gentle, as if smoothing a wrinkle on my jacket. Her fingers rested just below my elbow. Her voice, barely a breath. "Let's not confuse things. This is Caroline's day." I looked down at her hand, then up at the aisle. Caroline and Michael were kneeling, heads bowed, encircled by a row of family members. I could have walked forward. No one could have stopped me. But that wasn't the point. The point was, they believed I didn't belong. I sat. The violinist began something sentimental. Guests dabbed their eyes. Flashbulbs flickered. At the reception, my table was tucked behind a pillar, beside a catering door. The place card read, "S. Vance," in small font, no rank. The napkin was a shade paler than the others, an accident, perhaps, or a deliberate message. A waiter poured wine into the glasses around me but skipped mine. When I inquired, he glanced at his list and said, "Oh, non-drinking guest?" I didn't correct him. From across the room, Caroline floated like a candle flame. She posed for photos, twirled in white, kissed cheeks, embraced people with an intensity that felt less like affection and more like possession. Michael kept one hand on her lower back, the other loosely curled around his glass. He never looked my way again. At one point, a woman asked if I worked in security for the venue. I told her yes. Then the toasts began. Martha raised her glass. To love and to loyalty, she declared, two things this family values above all. The room chuckled politely. Caroline beamed. Michael shifted his weight. I took a sip of the wine I had finally poured for myself. It tasted expensive and empty. That was the moment I knew. They didn't think I was family. But they were about to learn what kind of family I commanded. She's just a gate guard. Who would want her? My sister's voice echoed through the microphone. The room erupted in laughter. It wasn't a gentle sound, it was sharp, slicing before it echoed, lingering longer than it should. The kind of laughter I used to hear in locker rooms, around dinner tables, behind closed doors I wasn't supposed to know existed. This one simply had better lighting and more expensive wine. Caroline stood at the center of the ballroom, glowing beneath the chandeliers. Her dress shimmered as if the entire event had been tailored around her. She held the microphone in one hand and a champagne flute in the other, balanced like a queen with her crown and scepter. All eyes were on her. She lived for that. To think. She purred sweetly, scanning the room. Even my big sister made it here tonight, traveling all the way from wherever she's stationed now. She grinned, turning slightly toward my table. Guarding doors for greatness, I'm sure. Everyone give a round of applause for the silent sentry in our lives. More laughter, a few polite claps. One or two guests shifted uncomfortably, but most just smiled and raised their glasses, oblivious or worse, complicit. Martha chimed in from her table, her voice carrying with the crispness of authority. She's the shame of this family, but at least she made it on time. That did it? The whole room tilted with amusement. I rose, not quickly, not in anger, but slowly, steadily, like something inevitable unfolding. Michael was already watching me. He hadn't laughed, hadn't smiled, just watched. The way someone might watch a storm gathering over calm water. Caroline's smile faltered for half a breath, just enough to register. Then she lifted the mic again. "Oh, come on," she laughed. "It's a joke." "Lighten up, Scarlett. You always took everything." Then Michael moved. He stepped forward, deliberate, not rushed, not hesitant, just decided. Conversation stilled mid-sentence. Utensils paused mid-air. Every photographer pivoted lenses, capturing motion in a scene they hadn't scripted. He walked the length of the room, past tables of old commanders, academy friends, distant cousins in tailored suits. Each step seemed to echo. When he reached me, he stopped exactly one pace away. Then he saluted, a sharp, crisp, precise military salute. The kind you don't give to a sibling, a friend, or a joke? "Ma'am," Michael said, his voice steady, carrying clear. "Please forgive my wife." He turned to the room, still holding the salute. "This," he declared, "is Lieutenant General Scarlett Vance, my commanding officer." Gasps, not whispers, gasps, audible, collective, as if every tuxedo in that room had suddenly lost its starch. I didn't move. Caroline swayed where she stood, the microphone sliding from her fingers. It hit the floor with a hollow thud. She took a step backward, eyes wide, mouth agape, and fainted. Martha stood abruptly, knocking over a flute of champagne. "Scarlett?" she started, but the word dissolved into a breathless choke. And I didn't even blink. They didn't speak, not because they didn't know what to say, but because every word would confirm what they had done. The ballroom held its breath as if it had swallowed a landmine. Silence clung to the walls, stuck in the folds of linen tablecloths, settled inside every untouched flute of champagne. The orchestra had stopped mid-melody, forks hovered mid-air. Guests blinked as if they'd forgotten how. I was still standing, so was Michael. His salute finished, his hand now lowered to his side, fingers steady, spine straight. A statement had been made. Not a gesture, not a plea. A truth carved into the very center of the night. Lieutenant General Scarlett Vance. My name hadn't been spoken by anyone in that room for years. Not with respect. Not with weight. Not like that. Martha's hand twitched toward a napkin. It slid off her lap and dropped to the floor with a whisper. She didn't bend to pick it up. Her eyes darted toward me, searching for a place to land. Some exit, some shadow, some denial, but there wasn't one. Caroline sat, rather collapsed, into her chair. Her face was pale and frozen, eyes wide as if reality hadn't caught up with her body yet. Her lips parted slightly, no words forming. The woman who had just performed for 100 guests, who had orchestrated an entire evening around her image, now looked like a child cornered by something too vast to name. No one moved. Then, someone did. From the second row of tables, past the wine bar, near the carved ice swan, a man in a navy blazer stood slowly. Colonel Davies, retired but still sharp around the edges. He had commanded the 73rd Engineering Battalion back when I was a lieutenant, when I still had dirt in my teeth and something to prove. His shoulders squared as he raised his right hand in a clean, deliberate salute. The air thickened. A second man stood, General Sterling, who had once lectured at West Point. Then a third, a woman in her 50s whose name I didn't know but whose posture gave her away. Army once. Career. Then a fourth. 4 salutes. Not dramatic, not rehearsed, just quiet acknowledgement slicing through the polite fabric of the night. Martha finally found her voice. "This is not the time," she started, her voice trembling beneath the surface tension. But no one turned to look at her. Eyes were on me now. Not because I'd asked for them. Not because I demanded them, but because the room had been rethreaded, cell by cell, and every thread pointed here. I could feel the weight of it pressing in, the discomfort, the shame, the recalibration, as people whispered internally, "Is this the same woman Caroline mocked? The one we dismissed?" They were all performing mental rewrites, desperate to salvage some version of themselves that hadn't laughed 2 minutes ago. Michael took one step back, giving me the floor without ever saying a word. I didn't move. I didn't take the mic. I didn't raise my voice, I just stood there, and that was enough to make them squirm. When my mother finally called me by my middle name, I almost didn't recognize it. "Rose," she said softly, as if testing how the word would land. "Can we talk?" We were in the hotel lounge, the kind reserved for high-tier guests who preferred whispers to crowds. The room was draped in velvet shadows and the sterile hush of money. A single lamp illuminated our table. The coffee between us had gone cold, untouched. It smelled burnt. She hadn't called me anything but "you" or "your sister's sibling" in over a decade. Now, suddenly, she was reaching for a warmth she hadn't earned. I didn't correct her. I just waited. Martha straightened her blouse with a flick of her wrist. Her pearls were perfect, of course. Her posture, too. But the edge in her voice had dulled. She wasn't here to scold, she was here to spin. "You certainly made a statement," she said. I didn't answer. She offered a practiced smile, one she used for church potlucks and press photos. "The media is buzzing, and not all of it is flattering." Still, I said nothing. She tapped her fingernails against the porcelain cup. "We weren't prepared for that moment, Scarlett." No one was. "Not even your daughter fainting?" I asked coolly. "That wasn't Caroline has sensitivities to reality?" I asked, my voice steady, no need to rise. Martha exhaled sharply. "I didn't come to fight?" "Then why did you come?" She shifted suddenly, unsure of her footing. "I thought maybe you'd be willing to speak to the media, a statement. Perhaps just to clarify that we, didn't fully understand your role." I blinked. "You want me to issue a press release?" I said slowly. "To clean up your discomfort?" Martha leaned in slightly, urgency rising under her mask. "Not a lie, just context. We've always valued discretion, and people are asking questions now about the wedding, about Caroline's comments, about..." She hesitated. "About us?" I stared at her. She went on faster now. "You know how these things spread. A few sound bites and suddenly it's a scandal. Caroline's career, our family's reputation, it could all be misinterpreted." I almost laughed, but it came out like breath caught on glass. "You want me to help preserve the illusion," I said again. Martha's face hardened just a degree. "I was protecting the family." "No," I said, quiet but firm. "You didn't protect the family, you erased a daughter?" Silence fell between us like dust on old furniture. She looked away, blinking faster than usual. Do you have any idea? I continued. What it's like to watch your own mother pretend you don't exist? To be airbrushed out of your own bloodline. Her fingers clenched around the edge of the cup. I noticed it trembled slightly the first crack. I made choices, she said, finally, her voice low. Some of them were imperfect, but I never stopped caring. You just stopped calling. Martha's chin lifted, as if she were pulling herself back into position. If you had told us. I did. You just didn't want to hear it. You wanted a daughter who smiled and stayed small. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The silence was different now, not defensive, just exposed. Then she did something I hadn't seen since I was 10. She reached for my hand. The movement was tentative, her fingers hovering just above the table, waiting, as if she touched me, time might fold in on itself. I let her hover mid-air. She said she never meant to hurt me, but people like Caroline didn't need to stab. They whispered and let the knife fall on its own. We met in the cafe just past the hotel lobby, the kind designed for polite silences and overpriced tea. Morning light filtered through oversized windows, bathing everything in that soft, disorienting glow that made reality feel less solid. A few guests lingered with laptops and cappuccinos. No one looked at us. Caroline arrived 10 minutes late, sunglasses still on despite the indoor lighting. Her hair pulled into a low chignon that screamed, "I'm composed?" Even as her hands betrayed the twitch of nerves. She slid into the booth across from me and offered a smile so tight it could have been glued on. "Well," she exhaled, "that was dramatic." I said nothing. She cleared her throat. "Look, last night I went too far. It was just a joke. The gate guard thing, honestly, I didn't think." "That's the problem," I interrupted, folding my hands on the table. "You never think. You script." She blinked behind her glasses. "Excuse me." I reached into my leather folio and pulled out a sheet of paper, thick, slightly creased. It bore the official watermark of the Department of the Army's Public Affairs Division. At the top, a redacted sender. At the bottom, a timestamp from 7 years ago. Caroline tilted her head amused. "What's this supposed to be?" "A threat tip," I said, sent to a military whistleblower hotline. It accused me of falsifying deployment details, claimed I exaggerated my role in Helmand, that my Bronze Star was political. Caroline's smile froze. "I've never seen that." "Of course you have," I replied calmly. "You wrote it?" "That's absurd," she scoffed. "It's anonymous. Anyone could have sent it." I slid a second page across the table. This one from an AI linguistic analysis program used by the military for document authentication. 96% match, I said. "And one more thing, irregardless, no one with clearance says that. But you always did, even in school essays." She said nothing. "You sent this 2 months before I was passed over for my first promotion to brigadier general?" I had no idea why. No formal charges. Just silence. My file went dark for almost a year. Caroline shifted in her seat. "I was angry," she said finally. "You were always the star, the soldier, Dad's pride. Everyone compared us. I just wanted space to breathe. So you tried to bury me alive." She opened her mouth to protest, but I didn't let her. "You destroyed me so you could shine brighter," I said. "But you forgot I burn." I thought he was just the groom. Turns out he'd been carrying my silence like a debt. The rooftop bar was nearly empty, the kind of place meant for private grief disguised as quiet conversation. A few patrons nursed drinks in corners, the city lights blinking far below like broken promises. The wind tugged gently at the hem of my jacket. I didn't sit. Michael was already there, leaning against the railing with a glass of something amber, half finished. He didn't look like a man who'd just said, "I do." He looked like a man realizing what he'd done. "I didn't think you'd come," he said without turning. "You asked," I replied. He nodded slowly. "Didn't mean you'd say yes." I finally stepped closer. He looked older than I remembered, not in his face, but in his stance. More tired, less armored. "You want to talk about Helmand?" I asked. He turned to face me. You saved my life. That's old news. Not to me. A pause stretched between us, neither comfortable nor hostile, just full. She doesn't know, does she? I asked. He shook his head. I never told Caroline about the minefield, about what you did. I knew she'd twist it, turn it into some fable about how her husband nearly died serving and she stood by him. She weaponizes stories. Yours deserved better. I didn't answer. He looked away again down at the street. I followed your career quietly. Every promotion, every speech. I clipped the article when you got the second star. No one knew. Why? Because I owed you. And because I respected you more than anyone I'd ever met. I took a slow breath. Then why marry her? He was quiet for a long time. Then, because she was easy. Because the Vances offered a kind of life that felt clean, ordered. I was tired of almost dying. I wanted safe. She's not safe. She's strategy. He laughed softly. Yeah. I figured that out about a week after the engagement. I watched him for a moment. You know she sent in the tip, right? The one that stalled my first star. He closed his eyes. I always suspected, but I didn't want to be sure. I am. He gripped the railing harder, knuckles whitening. I stood up last night, he said, because if I didn't, I'd become one of them. He looked at me, then truly looked, and for a moment, I saw the man I pulled out of the dirt, not broken, but burdened. I didn't say thank you. I just said, don't ever let my name protect yours again. They tried to define me in whispers. I decided to speak loud enough to echo. Reagan National Airport always smelled of coffee and urgency. Rolling wheels, gate calls, the hum of strangers seeking other destinations. I liked airports. They didn't ask questions, just checked IDs and moved on. I was 20 minutes early for my flight, dressed in civilian clothes, hair loose, duffel slung over one shoulder. I had no intention of being seen. I should have known better. I was halfway to the TSA checkpoint when the first flash went off. Then another. Then came the voices, sharp, overlapping, unavoidable. General Vance, can we get a comment on the wedding incident? Mom, were you aware the bride would make that statement? Is it true the groom served under your command? I paused, just for a breath. That was all they needed. Suddenly, I was surrounded. A loose semicircle of microphones, smartphones, and eager faces trying to balance curiosity with respect. A security officer stepped forward, but I raised a hand. Not now, not yet. I spotted a podium off to the side, one of those flimsy setups near the flag and outdated tourism brochures. I walked toward it. No one followed at first, as if unsure whether I was about to speak or explode. When I turned to face them, they quieted almost instantly. I know why you're here, I began. I know what you want. A quote, a reaction, a headline, something sharp enough to slice, soft enough to sell. They waited. I met their gaze, one by one. I'm not my family's failure, I said, my voice even. I am their silence made visible. The room shifted. The press blinked. No one was typing yet, they were listening. For years, I continued. I served my country while being written out of my own story. I wore a uniform while being told I stained the family name. I earned my rank in blood, not approval. Someone whispered, "Damn." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a single sheet, the mission brief still warm from this morning's printer. "As of today," I said, "I'm launching the Resilience Foundation. It's a support network and legal resource for military personnel whose careers have been damaged by personal betrayal, by family, spouses, even friends. Because sometimes the deepest wounds come from those who claim to love us." A beat of silence, then a ripple of cameras clicking again. "This isn't about revenge," I stated. "It's about visibility. If you've been erased, sidelined, gaslit, disowned, we see you. You still serve. You still matter." The first hand went up, a reporter near the back. I nodded. "General, are you saying your family sabotaged your career?" I gave the smallest shrug. "You're welcome to connect your own dots. I've already connected mine." More murmurs, more notes scribbled, but still no chaos, just gravity. A young cadet, couldn't have been more than 19, stepped forward from the edge of the crowd. His uniform was crisp, nervous. He stood at attention. He saluted. I returned it. No words passed between us. They weren't needed. I turned to walk toward the gate. My phone vibrated in my pocket. One message, bold letters across the top pentagon. We need to talk. They wanted me quiet. They never imagined I'd become policy. The Pentagon briefing room was colder than I remembered. Not in temperature, but in spirit. Carpeted in navy blue, lined with polished wood, and the glint of American emblems, it was a room where decisions were made in tight language and tighter smiles. Where power didn't need to raise its voice because it already echoed in every corner. I stood behind a steel lectern, hands resting lightly on either side, my breath even. The presentation screen behind me glowed with a simple title, The Resilience Protection Protocol. Rows of brass and suits filled the seats before me. Generals, policy advisors, civilian analysts, and at the end of the first row, a man with silver bars and a skeptical frown, Admiral Hayes. With respect, Lieutenant General Vance. He said, "This sounds more personal than structural." I smiled slightly, not cold, just exact. "All policy is personal," I said. "Or it's propaganda." The room stilled. I let the silence work for me, not as a weapon, but as gravity. I didn't rush to fill it. I didn't need to. We have protocols for battlefield trauma, for combat loss. But what about betrayal from those we're told are safe? When your mother leaks your record, when your sister anonymously destroys your clearance, when a spouse trades your trust for attention. These are not tabloid issues. These are operational threats. A younger colonel near the back tapped furiously on his tablet. A civilian analyst leaned forward, nodding. Hayes didn't speak again. I closed the presentation with a single sentence. We train our people to survive war. It's time we teach the institution to defend them from peace. Then I stepped back. The room didn't erupt. It didn't clap. That's not how power rooms work. But the Undersecretary of Defense leaned in, folded his hands on the table, and said evenly, "We'll fund it?" That was enough. That was everything. They used to say, I was the disgrace of the Vance family. So I left the name behind, but kept the lessons. The front yard was in full bloom. Daffodils edging the walkway, hydrangeas bursting as if they had something to prove. It was the same as I remembered, and yet smaller, less imposing. The lawn had always been Martha's pride, a manicured metaphor for order, control. I stood at the edge of it, watching the curtains shift from the living room window. She'd seen me coming. When she opened the door, Martha didn't wear her pearls, no lipstick, just a pale cardigan. A blouse with buttons that didn't quite match. Her hair was thinner now, pulled back into something that tried to be a bun but didn't hold. She tried to smile. I didn't. "Come in," she said. Her voice had lost its sharpness, age or memory, or maybe just the effort of keeping so many lies straight. The house smelled of lemon polish, as always, but underneath it was something else, a hollowness, as if the walls had stopped trying to hold secrets. We didn't go far. Just the front room, 2 chairs, no tea, no pretense. Martha sat first. I stayed standing until I was sure I wanted to be here. She folded her hands in her lap and looked up at me as if she was afraid I might dissolve before her. "I didn't know how to protect you without erasing you," she said finally. "You were loud in a world that punished loud women." "I wasn't loud," I replied. "I was visible." "There's a difference." She looked down. Her fingers trembled slightly, betraying the stillness she worked so hard to project. "I thought if we distanced you," she continued, "people would forget. The scandal would fade. You could still have a life somewhere else." "You didn't erase me," I said. "You just made me unforgettable." There was a pause long enough to stretch between us like a canyon, then a soft creak from the stairs. "Caroline." She stood halfway down, barefoot, a robe tied loose around her waist. Her eyes met mine. She didn't say anything. Neither did I, Martha noticed. "She hasn't been the same since the wedding." "She never had to be anything," I said. "She got to just exist. I had to survive." Martha swallowed hard. "Is there anything I can do now?" "Yes," I said. "Don't rewrite my story after I'm gone." She blinked. "If someone asks why I don't come home, don't tell them I was distant. If they ask what happened, don't say it was complicated. Tell them you made a choice. And so did I. Martha reached for something. Maybe a hand. Maybe a past version of me. But I was already standing. I have a flight, I said. Caroline didn't move. Her grip on the banister was the only thing steady. I walked to the door. My boots didn't echo like they used to on this floor. Funny what time erases and what it refuses to touch. I left without hugging her, but I didn't slam the door. That, too, was a choice. Reputation is what they say when you're gone. Legacy is what remains when they're silent. The folding chairs were mismatched. Some wobbled, the fluorescent lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting the room in a soft, democratic kind of glow. No rank here, no hierarchy. Just people. Battered, a little bent, maybe, but unbroken. The community center smelled of burnt coffee and determination. I liked it. I stood at the front. Sleeves rolled just enough to show I wasn't here as a general, but not so far that I forgot I ever was. The Resilience Foundation banner hung crooked behind me, its corners tugged down by old tape. But the message printed on it was clear: we don't erase the wounded, we empower them. About 30 people had shown up, some in uniform, others in street clothes. One woman wore a name tag that simply read, Valerie. I cleared my throat. You are not what they said you are, I began. You are not unstable, not dramatic, not too difficult. You are witnesses, and we don't shame witnesses anymore. We train them to lead. There was a pause, then a small ripple of nods. A young woman in the second row raised her hand, maybe 17. Nervous but steady. My sister was discharged last year, she said. Her CO said she was too emotional for the unit. She tried to report harassment, and suddenly she had a psyche evil on her record. Her voice cracked on the last word. She swallowed quickly. I still have the letters, she added, but no one will take her case. I stepped forward slowly. Bring them to us, I said. We'll take it from here. She exhaled so deeply it made me realize she hadn't been breathing. Someone near the back was filming with their phone. I didn't care. Let them. This wasn't about secrecy. It was about the opposite. A man in his 50s stood tall, ex-military by his posture, civilian now by the quiet in his face. My son served under an intel major who told him to quit if he couldn't man up. They called him unstable when he pushed back. Your speech at the Pentagon, it was the first time he smiled in months. He said, maybe they're finally listening. I nodded once. No flourish, just enough. You tell him I said he wasn't wrong. We are. The room hummed with something raw. Not applause, not excitement. Recognition. And that's when the notification pinged on someone's phone. The video had gone viral. 20,000 views, then 50, then headline is Lieutenant General Vance, still serving, without saluting anyone. I glanced at the screen, then back at the room. Let them watch. Let them finally understand who I've always been. They never apologized, but now they speak my name with care, because it's heavier than theirs. The National Defense Symposium Hall pulsed with a quiet intensity. Rows of chairs stretched back into a sea of uniformed suits and lived experience. Veterans sat beside policy wonks, survivors next to senators. Cameras hovered, waiting to catch something real. The stage was minimalist, just a lectern, a glass of water, and a single flag behind me. I didn't bring notes. Martha was somewhere in the audience. I hadn't seen her arrive, but I'd been told she was coming, that she insisted on a seat close to the front, that she hadn't brought Caroline. I stepped up to the mic. The hush that followed wasn't for protocol. It was the kind reserved for people who've walked through fire and made it look like fog. I was once told that blood is thicker than water. I began, as if that were a comfort, as if drowning in blood hurt less. A ripple passed through the room. Families, I continued, are supposed to protect, to shield. But sometimes they aim for silence. Sometimes the betrayal doesn't come from a foreign adversary, but from someone who shares your dinner table, your last name, your childhood bedroom wall. The air tightened. I've learned that the most dangerous betrayal isn't loud, it's polite. It comes with smiles at weddings and silence at funerals. It comes dressed as loyalty, but demands your disappearance. I paused just long enough. And I disappeared for years. Not because I was ashamed, but because I was punished for speaking when they wanted me quiet. Because I refused to be the story they needed to survive. A few gasps, a few nods. Martha, I knew, was crying now. She'd practiced silence so long that even her tears would be noiseless. I looked out at the sea of faces. Young, old, uniformed, not. So many had come not for policy, but for permission to be angry, to be visible, to be loud. That ends today, I said. I am working with lawmakers to introduce federal protections for those betrayed, not by the system, but within it. A bill that recognizes that sabotage doesn't always come from the outside. That family, if weaponized, is still a threat. I stepped slightly back from the mic, letting the room catch up. I was once their secret, I said. Now I am their sentence. The room didn't erupt. It exhaled. A collective letting go of something held for too long. As I stepped off the stage, a young reporter caught me near the curtain. Would you ever go back to them?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. I never left myself, I said. That was enough. I used to live to be seen. Now I've learned how to see myself clearly and without permission. The shutters creaked softly as the sea breeze slipped through them, carrying the scent of salt and lemons. Afternoon light spilled across the stone floor of the cottage, warming everything it touched. The waves below whispered against the Amalfi cliffs, as if the coastline itself was exhaling. I had painted all morning. Nothing grand, just brush strokes across canvas, color where there once was only shadow. The easel stood near the window, facing the horizon, the unfinished sky waiting patiently. I didn't rush. There was no schedule here, no command briefings, no deadlines, only the rhythm of the sea and the pages of a leather-bound journal slowly filling with pieces of myself I hadn't known I'd lost. The knock came just past 4. It was Leo, the boy from the village, no older than 10, holding a basket with bread, olives, and a folded newspaper I hadn't asked for. His smile was gap-toothed, his curiosity barely contained. "Gracie," I said, taking the basket. "Prego," he replied, shifting on his feet. "Signora, were you really a general?" I paused, then smiled. "Once now, I'm just someone who fought for herself." He seemed satisfied with that, running off before I could say more. Back inside, my phone buzzed. The old Army-issued device? I'd kept it out of habit, tucked in a drawer that now held fading lanyards and medals I never displayed. The voice message was from Lieutenant Miller. "Scarlett," he said, his tone measured. "The President's office wants to appoint you to the Joint Ethics Board. You'd chair it, if you're willing. Think about it." I listened once, then deleted it. There's a particular freedom in knowing you no longer owe your story to anyone. I sat at the writing desk. The journal lay open to its final page. I dipped the pen, held it still for a breath, then wrote the last line. I walked alone, but not lost. Ink dried slow under the amber light. I closed the journal, locked it in the drawer with everything else I didn't need to wear on my chest. Then stood, pushed open the doors to the terrace, and stepped outside. The air wrapped around me like an old friend. The wind caught strands of my hair and flung them toward the sun. Below, the sea stretched wide and endless. No applause, no headlines, just the sound of a woman who once vanished, learning how to return, not to them, but to herself. After a lifetime of being silenced, she didn't need a microphone to be heard. She let truth speak for her. The family that once disowned her now flinched at the sound of her name, not because of shame, but because of power. Justice didn't come through vengeance, but through presence, steady, unshakable, and earned. Like the final chord of a long-forgotten melody, justice may arrive late, but it resonates powerfully once it's heard. If this story resonated with you, please consider giving it a thumbs up and subscribing for more narratives that explore resilience and the power of truth. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Type 1 if you felt seen, or 2 if you still seek more answers.